Hi, welcome to Awakenings Within. This is Sandy Archer, your host tonight, and welcome. If you're here, please say hello and put your hi in the comments. And if you're here on a replay, put hashtag replay. Would love to hear from you and look forward to hearing from you. I have a guest host tonight. Bob was not with us again this evening, but he shall return soon. So wish him well and send positive vibes and prayers his way. So I appreciate that. And hey, Mark, and hey, Heather, nice to see you. But I have a guest host tonight. You sometimes see him in the peanut gallery. And his name is Michael Jones. And welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice to have you. There he is in person. You can see him.
I just feel like I'm loose, like I'm free from having to type everything now. I mean, this is a moment of, like absolute coming out for me. So thank you.
Coming out. Yeah. But you're kind of a little bit in the dark, just a little. I can't see you totally. So he's trying to stay nondescript still.
That's right.
He's still kind of in the peanut gallery in the shadows. Mm-hmm. So Heather's with us. Mark is with us. So thank you for stopping by and saying hello. And before the show, Michael and I were talking about what we would talk about tonight. And we had talked prior that would be on God's sovereignty. And we kind of switched the topic a little bit into God. It's still God's sovereignty, but kind of the stages of life. And so we'll be kind of talking about something, that about the stages of life. So Michael, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine. But my mother is now going through a kind of an end of life situation where she's, literally last Wednesday thought we were going to be delivering last rites. And she somehow has survived yet another week, stabilized enough to be moved back to her place, or assisted living place, where she's been for 8 years now. Oh. But it's been a total trial, challenging at a lot of levels, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, especially with my two sisters. So
yeah, and that's a hard thing. So assisted living for the last 8 years. That's a long time. So as we were talking about this, I've lost my mother about almost 10 years ago, and we had to deal with I have two sisters as well, so we were kind of talking about that I kind of understand and on one way. And we were kind of talking about spirituality, and people are wishing you well, Michael. So I just want you to see that. And Bob, you're with us. You have no voice, but you're listening. We're missing you, Bob, too, by the way. So hi, Larry. So, okay, we've got our peanut gallery alongside you, Michael. So I'm really sorry about your mom. And so in spirituality, as far as faith-based, I mean, where are you at there, or where's she at there?
Well, my mom and my dad, who passed away about 1.5 years ago, are both, and we're both Christians. And what's interesting is myself and my two sisters all were Christians at one point, but one sister and her husband have diverted from that to more of an agnostic / atheistic perspective. The other is staunchly Christian, if not Christian conservative. So I certainly come from a Christian viewpoint, but I'm in the process of trying to help navigate for all three of us to find common ground and walk this out together in such a way that we really focus on our mom, walk out her wishes, try to preserve that relationship, and hopefully together bury, my mother in relative peace whenever that time comes. So,
right.
But it's been multiple hours of dialogue, texting, mean comments that they, like they both in the last 24 hours called each other psychotic monsters. So
Oh no.
that's
Yeah.
happened, and I've tried to talk them both down from the ledge. So, but it's really at the heart of it. What's in, I hate to be so glib as to say it's an interesting dynamic, is it's really a clash of worldviews in many ways, and a very different, philosophies, one being, Christian faith-based, and the other being, more agnostic and atheistic.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yeah.
And you can't change that in either person just because you want to. That's trying to find common ground where you can,
Right.
and, allow for the differences. And so that's been an interesting thing to navigate. But I
Right.
mean, it's not that different than a lot of the things we're navigating in society
That's right.
level, right?
Right. Well, I have to admit that my sisters and I kind of went through that after my mom passed. We felt, me and my younger sister kind of felt the presence of angels during the time of my mom's passing. And then my other sister didn't. And the first time her and I ever got in a huge fight, Donna that comes on here, she said that I was allowed to share this story. That was the first time we ever got in a knockdown, drag out fight. We'd never been in a fight before. We love each other. We were like best friends. So for us to get in a fight, and it was because she didn't feel the same presence we felt or see what we felt. And for a long time, she thought it was because me and my sister thought we were more spiritual.
Right.
And that we had more of a spiritual, handle on things. But as the years have come around, and a revelation that God had kind of given us, is really, she already had all those talks with our mother, and knew that our mother was going to heaven. But me and my other sister didn't know if she was. So there was the differences. And so God had to show up, right? And like me and the younger sister who were not sure, we felt the presence because we needed that proof, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my other sister didn't need that proof because she already knew. So it was kind of a weird revelation. It was like, whoa, but that was the first time we ever got in a fight. And when this happens, unfortunately, in these stages of lives, and that does happen with families. Families fight over things that you would never imagine. Families, come into conflict, because of the emotions. It's very emotionally charged. You think that you're handling it, but it can be emotional. And so we at the time, I mean, I was flipped out. I was like, oh my gosh, we just lost our mom. How can we be in this big, terrible fight? We're supposed to be then loving on each other. We're supposed to be comforting each other. And so, our worldviews were different, like you're saying. And so, I did need proof. Like I was asking God for proof during that time, because I was unsure. My mom wasn't evangelical, but she said she was agnostic, my mother, and so, it gets funky at this stage. So, I mean, I'm just sharing this story with you, because just to know that I think all of our families kind of go through this in some respect during this time. And I really wish there were ways. I almost feel like there needs to be a counselor of some, besides a chaplain, or, somebody outside of that. I mean, I've thought that for a while, that it'd be so comforting to have someone to come in to help these kind of things. What do you think?
Well, I agree. Bob and I, with his very limited voice, I called him, and I try to bug him regularly. So he wasn't able to stay on the call very long in his condition, but he was talking to me about my situation, and he made a really good point. He said that he knows a guy that has transitioned 6,000 souls from here to the thereafter that he grew up with, and that this kind of thing is very common. I think, to your point, that what's a dynamic that you don't foresee is that you have to fight on two fronts, right? It's hard enough to fight on one. You actually probably really three fronts. The front with your actual loved one passing away, suddenly, unbeknownst to you, the medical side and the insurance side, that you don't know how that works and what their agenda is and what the protocols is and what the options are, trying to figure that out. And then you throw in this third dynamic of dealing with siblings and other loved ones that have a different worldview or different perspective. And it isn't that they're necessarily wrong, but it's different.
Right.
And the reality is that some of those differences could lead you down a very, razor-like edge, could lead you and split down a very different path, maybe, to where maybe that person ends up in a vegetative state if you're wrong or right, whichever
Right.
side you're on. So there's a
Right.
lot at stake, and especially for the loved one,
Yeah.
and especially if there's no governance documents, which in our case there are not.
Right. We didn't have that either.
Yeah.
We didn't have that
It's
either.
kind of
And
no man's land, trying to figure it out and hope you can agree to something.
right. Our mother had emphysema and was dying of lung cancer. So she had an acute episode, which means she couldn't breathe. And she had told us for a long time that she didn't want to be resuscitated. She wanted to have a DNR, but she didn't have it on file. One. Two, she told us that all those years, but when she had the acute episode and she was scared, guess what she said? She told the doctor asked her and she said, yes, resuscitate me. And so me and my sister are like, oh crap. Like we were going to make the wrong decision, apparently, and that makes you go, whoa. And that's why those documents are very important, and I'm going to plead to anyone to get those documents in order because she didn't have a will. She didn't have a DNR. She didn't have any of those things in place. So we're, like you said, there's so many dynamics. You're dealing with the medical side, which they do a protocol that they don't even tell you they're doing at the time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, and you're unaware that this is a protocol until you ask the questions. But how do you know to ask those questions? This is all like a learning curve that you have to quickly learn, within, days. I mean, I wish there were more courses out there for this stage of life to explain it to people and families before this happens to them. Because it just happens to them. You don't know until you know. And and so we had to deal with all of that too. We didn't know. And so then they were going to resuscitate my mother, and then she went into a coma. So and then that didn't have to happen, but she didn't have the necessary papers. So then her whole accounts and everything got frozen and put into, she had to go into the probate for a couple years. I mean, so, when people say, please get your affairs in order, I mean, definitely, even at my age, at any age, make sure you have those things, because it can be a point of contention with your family members if you don't, because then you think what the wishes are, and then you're unclear. And, maybe your sister's heard something different than you heard, and, it gets murky. And so, I mean, this is a tough situation, Michael, and I'm sorry that we're talking about it. So, I'm trying to be careful.
Well, I'm not going to say I'm fine with it and be glib about it, but I mean, my mom had MS from the time I was in college, and she has been on a downward cycle for most of my adult life, and for the last 3 or 4 years really seen that accelerate. And then she got COVID, which she has recovered from, and was in a COVID hospital, and that was what accelerated all these other comorbidities she had on top of it. And so on top of MS, a heart attack, a blood clot that could release at any time, and a few other things. She's somehow had the will or ability to survive what, I was in the parking lot last Wednesday morning texting my children that I felt, and I still do, like a sense of joy and peace at her passing, because of just the challenges and difficulty of her life, and that she came to faith really as a result of getting MS, and and trying to see the silver lining and the long-term end of all of this. And then literally we're sitting there waiting for her, to somehow take her last breath. And then she survives. And 11 o'clock at night, we're like, well, I think she's, here she is still,
Mm-hmm.
pulse,
Yeah.
whatever it is. I mean, yeah, all of her vitals went back up and, into near normal. And yet she's still not awake,
Yeah.
really. And was on, 4 grams of morphine or whatever it is. And, and was in that position, which they just guide you to in hospice. And,
Right.
and that's what's created a lot of the conflict. The silver lining is I have one of my sisters that we've been estranged from have, become much more close with me lately to where we're humanized again.
Yeah.
And yet my other sister, who she's also been estranged from, they have been more at odds and had more ugly words. And I'm in the middle playing referee and trying to be peacemaker.
Oh my gosh.
And to go, you both are saying the same things about each other. Just calm down. Let's, our common ground here is greater than our differences, and you just hear each other and let's walk through this together. So
I
I'm
like that.
hoping
Our
that
common
can happen,
ground is greater than our differences. That's a great quote.
yeah.
Yeah. Our common ground is greater. And it's true. So, where are you at now? I mean, where is she at? She's at the assisted living still, and
Well, yeah, to your point, we're figuring out legal things. Yesterday, I literally signed off documents at the, hospice place after I go through this entire exercise. Come to find out, they at the center she's in aren't supposed to come in every 21 days. Which I'm like, literally, now that I know that, I'm going to possibly have to break this agreement if you can't get that center to relax those, because she needs, full-time care.
more
And,
care.
yeah,
Right.
we're like shocked that she's released from the hospital. I mean, she's seemingly was, on the edge. And so, and that's some of the things in the medical, like how much do you push back to the hospital? And, I'd say it's very important to have those documents, because unless your relationships with your loved ones are really clean and clear, and now two of us, my sister and I, have power of attorney and are co-guardians, and we have to get along,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a
Right.
kind of law that could be fought out that could, bring injury to my mom in a sense. And another sister, I'm trying to get her to see that reality that, like, we have to get along with her. She has as much push as I have pull. And,
Right.
and
Are you the
so
oldest? Are you the
I'm
oldest?
the eldest. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because that's what we learned. We learned that the oldest is who make if there's nothing in writing, the oldest takes over. So I didn't know that prior till that time. So whoever your oldest sibling is, that's who's going to take over if there's no documents. So it's
is
something to
that a law,
know.
or are you saying that practically?
No, that's in the medical field at the hospital that they say, okay, well, whoever's the oldest is who makes the decisions from here.
My sister and I, my youngest sister and I, are co-guardians at this point, but they both eclipse me. One of them owns a, clinic, for men. The other one has spent 10 years entrenched in this, medical battlefield, caring for my mom and my grandmother before that. And I'm coming in with, like a D in biology and the least medical knowledge among them. So I'm
Right.
like have to go, I could listen to either one of them and go, it sounds like you're right. Oh, it sounds like you're right. So I'd say
Oh,
get an education. I mean,
yeah.
you and I were talking about this a little bit. There's, I mean, in the, out in the public arena, there's so much, when the worldviews collide of, faith and no faith, um, and there's always differences. Then you bring in, the medical side of, like, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, and what all of those dynamics are. That's kind of one side of the coin. And then you get to death, and yet, you and I were talking, there's very little debate or discourse about that comparatively to, you could have a very solidified position, whether you're a, Christian against or for abortion, or, or a non-Christian for or against abortion. There's all of this public
Right.
dialogue, and it seems like in here you find yourself in very, murky ground trying to navigate, as complex the dynamics, trying to figure out, how to see someone pass from here to the next stage.
Right. I was so unaware until I went through it. I was so unaware. I didn't know the different I didn't know the protocol. I was in medical field for 30 years and did not know that there was a passing, death protocol. I didn't know that, and I do now. But I was just talking to my sister before this and telling her, remember I was freaking out because I wanted them to give her Ensure shakes. I wanted them to give her nourishment. I wanted them to give her something to drink, something to eat, something. And they were like, well, that's not what we do at this point. And I'm going, well, who said that? Whose decision is that? Is that the doctor's decision? Is that my decision? And was that her, so those things do matter. I mean, because you're unaware that that's a thing. You don't even know. You're like, oh, they don't give you nourishment or this, and then there's morphine involved, and then you're like, okay, explain the morphine thing to me, So, I mean, it's something that we all are unaware of until we have to go through it.
Right.
And then you're smacked in the face with it, and you're already going through something emotionally about it. So now you have to make a logical decision, and then there's the spiritual side. So, you got the mind, body, spirit going on throughout the whole thing. So, I really wish we had more. I know hospice nurses are wonderful, and I know the whole thing. In fact, there's this couple that will actually be on next Thursday, and they were prior physicians. And he was just telling me about the lady in London that started hospice. Her name was Cecily Saunders. And what an amazing woman she was. And he's going to actually, what's interesting is he's going to tell the story about her next week. He got to meet her and actually do rounds with her over in London. But she set up this whole compound for people that were passing, brought in the patients. I don't know. Do you know Cecily, who she is, Michael?
No, never heard of her.
And her name is Cecily Saunders, but he's going to tell the story about how he met her and what happens. But what she did for the hospice community is amazing. So if you guys want to look her up, and Dr. Holmes is going to talk about it next week, but now that we're talking about that, but she's the one who brought hospice into center because she felt like people needed to learn about it. And I think here in America, we need to have a little more awareness, I think. Yeah. And I think that's a conversation that needs to happen within families before these events happen. I think we think we know what we think we're prepared, but I think when the time comes, I don't think that we really are. So
I think here's a good example of that. So so here's kind of if I could put out a hypothetical question is, what to you is real mercy and care and empathy? And you have, for instance, in my case, one sister who would say, I don't want my mother to die thirsty or hungry, right? And yet that has ramifications to give her strength in possibly a situation where she won't get any better. And then you have another sister who would say, you're putting her in a position by your quote unquote ethics and, in Christian values of valuing life, in not, aiding her in death, letting it take more of a natural process than I would. But, now she's going to have to face bed sores. She has no veins to poke in. She's possibly going to choke on food. So these are the things you really, when you get down to the nitty gritty, that I'm finding myself going, okay, so we both can agree that she's going to have some food or water, and we need to let the medical people dictate what that is, not us intervene ourselves in, so that we're, giving her too much and creating swelling and a host of other things, or the other. And so both of them, I'm like, we pretty much agree about everything except the amounts and the application of that. And yet that's the razor. That's the
Wow.
razor that if you withhold that, you're going to draw, a no from one camp. And if you want to go too far with that, the other camp is going to protest. So that's where,
Right.
you go, well, you both have 50-50 decision. There's two people with that. And those are the things you got to think about. I mean, that you get into. I mean, not to take over where you might want to go with this, but Sandy, I'd be interested if anybody had either advice for me or questions, since you've obviously been through this.
Yeah.
I'd be curious if anybody had anything before we ran out of time. So,
Well, Heather's went through this too, and she actually had kind of the question. I don't know which would be worse. It was all on her. She didn't have any siblings when she had to deal that with her mother.
yeah.
She doesn't know if that would. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It depends on the relationships. And I mean, I feel like, I'm a fairly intelligent person. And when I went through this whole situation, I was the most unintelligent person. I was going, I used to think I was smart. Now I don't feel very smart. And it's because you just don't know. You don't have the knowledge of all of this. And like she said, when they make them comfortable, they aren't able to have, right.
Mm-hmm.
So right, who makes that decision that they aren't able to? And that is the question.
So let me tell you a little bit of a funny story if people want to post questions. So I had a class in college as a freshman that was at William Jewell that was meant to merge different disciplines together. So you weren't just learning math or science or history. I don't know. It was very integrated. So one of the topics in this foundations course at the time that was supposedly very innovative, and maybe was euthanasia. There's a class of easily 50 people in there. And again, I'm a freshman, lived probably obviously a pretty sheltered life in many respects. And I spent the first 2 weeks of my time in there trying to figure out, as they brought out these analogies of how do you decide who stays in the boat and what problem they had with the young people in Asia, the youth in Asia. It took me literally 2 weeks to figure out that it was not about the youth in Asia. I'm like, why are we keeping young people out of from Asia out of boats? I don't really get it. So I'm like, I saw finally, they brought out some writing. I'm like, oh, it's like, oh, that's EU. I literally, that was one of my, it could be so crass, but one of my dumber moments in life.
It's not about the youth that are in Asia. No,
I didn't know.
Definitely no. Yeah. I again, be working in medical for so many years, when it came down to that, I was like, wow, I wasn't aware, I wasn't knowledgeable. So if any of you guys are more knowledgeable about it, please chime in. And it does bring you to an ethical issue. What is natural, going natural? I know, Heather, that you mentioned it, the natural process, but is the natural process with or without a medication? When do you decide that medication is or isn't, or assisted this or that? So this is a ethical.
Well, this is what I told my sisters with my very uneducated analogy is I'm on board to let my mother go over the cliff and not stop her. I'm on board to make her comfortable going over the cliff. I don't want to shove her over the cliff myself, or I don't want you to either. So
right.
That's, as close to, non-educated way of coming up with some kind of guiding principle to go. I mean, and inside of that, you could have nuances and somebody could challenge that and say, well, you're still wrong. But, for us to try to have some talking points and some ways to, communicate to each other and to make it actually available, as hard as it is for somebody who's not, I had to talk to my other sister about, your sister, since you've been alienated for the decade, has gone far away from the Christian faith. That's just where she's at. So, calling her psychotic, she could be in a class of what I would say would be somebody who'd be an atheist or an agnostic who doesn't believe there's a God. It would put human suffering and would have no problem intervening in human affairs in a way that you would say that that's God's place, because they don't believe in God. So you're going to have to accept that she's there. You're going to have to deal with her because she's a part of the process, and not be so aggressive with her to demand that she believe what you believe. You're not going to convince her any more than you are on Facebook to beat her into your political position. You're not going to do it. So
right.
Deal with it, find the common ground if you can, state your position, and try to find a way to navigate through these murky, challenging waters to try to get to the other side, and that's the best you can do, I think. I mean, there's no magic wand you can wave to make people who fundamentally have very different views of the world agree, except to find that common ground and say we have a lot more, we're fine with having a do not resuscitate. We don't want to put feeding tubes in. There's a lot of things we're saying here, and we've got to find that and hold on to that and let the places we disagree, we just have to talk it through and be respectful of each other's views, all the way through if we can do that. So.
Right. Because through this, people go through such a roller coaster of emotions. Obviously, some, you don't know how you're going to act through that until you go through it. It's just one of those things. You cannot predict it. You can't prepare. You can prepare as much as you can, but you really don't know how your feelings are going to come out and how you're going to react. And that's just the thing. And giving the other people in your family grace. And that's really what it came down to. My sister and I had the knockdown drag out afterwards. We'd never talked badly to each other ever. And that was the first time ever. And we were shocked that it was over what it was over. We were like, what? It's not over possessions. It was over, if we felt an angel in the room. So that is a bizarre, reasoning, right? So that's not something I would have predicted ever. And it's kind of like, I think we just need to let people process things the way they have to process them. They have to go through their grief and their mourning process. We're all different. We have to give each other grace, and while giving each other grace, making sure your wishes are known, but not, like you're saying, have a common ground. It sounds like you guys are doing a good job with that as far as that goes.
I wouldn't go that far, but let me ask you, is Donna on with us?
No, she's not. She's not on Facebook anymore. So unfortunately.
That's bad, because I was going to say that I always thought Donna was more spiritual than you.
Ah. Wow.
It's so much more fun to get to verbalize that than to have to type it in the deal.
Wow, really?
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Well, we're spiritual differently. She grew up Catholic and I didn't. I was never made to pick a religion. I was kind of Catholic, but then I was saved at a Baptist church at the age 7. So, hey, Hitesh, thank you for joining us. Hitesh actually is a coach kind of in this arena. He does coaching. Hitesh, I'd love to hear your thoughts. He actually lives in London, I think, and he takes care of his elderly mother. And he does a coaching kind of around caregivers. So Hitesh, I'd love to hear what you have to say on this topic about the stages of life and stages. So anyway, yes, thanks Nora for joining. But this is where, I mean, I feel like you just can't put a protocol out there, because I think all families are different and their dynamics are different, don't you? I'm not sure. I wish that we had more information, though. I really wished before that happened with my mom that I I had been through, maybe a couple of deaths to understand the death process and what the medical field thinks is the death process, what the spiritual field, putting them all together,
Yeah.
I mean, my parents had knew, but they never really shared any of that. Isn't that strange? Like
Yeah.
they'd went through it with their parents and stuff. And it makes me wonder why our parents don't share their experience of that with us.
Yeah, it is odd. But you kind of find
Yeah.
yourself like, there's been 10 people you knew who were close to you who went through it. And maybe because of the pain and the turmoil and the lack of clarity that they just like would rather, sweep it under the rug and put it behind them and not talk about it, because it's like trying to understand war or trying to understand death itself. It's just, there's not an easy, explanation, so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that in my mother's grandparents' generation, they didn't talk about a lot of things. They didn't tell you much about life. They didn't tell you the facts of life. They didn't tell you,
Right.
they kind of just they didn't tell you much. Like almost like, hey, oh, okay, you're on your own.
Right. Yeah.
Get out there. I think, yeah, you had been through, but it was different with her mom. And I think that is different when it's a parent, it's different, and, I mean, I like I said, I've been through a couple, since then. They were all different experiences. So, you just don't know until it's upon you. So, Hitesh, do you have any insights, if you're still on here, um, about what you know about how to deal with something like that? Let's see. Bob had a long thing. I'm sorry, I didn't put his up here. Let's see. I'll let you read that if you can.
Me?
Yes.
I watched my mom go through hell having to make weighty decisions about my father when he came down with cancer. The last week in hospice was fraught with her having to make tough decisions while wanting to grieve. We decided with her to deal with all the possibilities long beforehand and have a plan in place for each possible scenario. Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I mean that's the thing is you don't know the decisions that you're going to have to make until that time comes. And I feel like it's so important maybe in this message is to really figure out, to go to someone to figure out, what this different scenarios are. He said that they had to deal with all the possibilities long beforehand and
Right.
have a plan in place. But where did you go to? Just with each other, or where did you get the not because you'd been through it? I guess maybe him being a pastor before, maybe he had been through that, so counseling others. But when it comes down to it, you don't know what your siblings are going to feel like through this process. You don't know how they're going to act. They act actually really opposite of what you think. And
Yeah.
it surprises you, and it's because it's part of the grieving and the mourning process. So, I mean, it's one of those things. That's where that's why you have to look to God for your guidance at that point to give you just peace in the midst of all of it. Because really, I mean, like we were talking about, no one's right or wrong. I mean, that's the thing. So what have from God, what have you been drawing from him? I'm sure you've been praying about it. I mean, what are you gaining from him?
Well, I think that the first thing that I gained was I went to the hospital with a degree of sadness over my mom's life. And I think that I felt almost from God, a rebuke, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
not really looking back at the good that had come out of the bad, in the sense that my parents, when I became a Christian, were adversarial to faith. They certainly fought against me and ultimately my sisters. And when my mom got MS, and that, was the, you know, launch pad, if you will, to the ultimate demise, where she lost, mobility and, a lot of her reasoning capacity, and ultimately found herself having other things as a result that have put her where she's at now. That God used a lot of those, very hard situations for good. And
Mm-hmm.
so I began to have a different perspective, that I was actually, not, I wouldn't, excited again would be too, but I was actually happy for her, thankful for her life and what she'd been through, and that what led her to this place. And that, and that if the gospel is true, and if God is real, and if Jesus died for our sins, and there really is an eternity where we live in perpetual, bliss and peace with no pain and suffering, and that we have these glorified bodies that look like we are at maturity, allegedly, and that forever we will be, in such a better place. As Paul said, it's much better to be, with the Lord than here in the body. If that's all true, and my mom's on that pathway, no matter what it took to get her here. Now, that's a faith-based eternal perspective. Someone else would look at it, and it's true also, even for a Christian looking at it as well, that there's another side to that is just like, she lived a very hard, painful, and sad life relative to who she was prior to this.
Right.
And that the outworkings of that affected my dad and his life and his happiness, and and all of us. My kids have no idea their grandparents really were the great parents they were. Where ours was the house you hung out. My parents were, buying new cars and buying a house and had hopes for life, and they just fell off, the edge.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at all of that, and you've got to get, I think you have to get a perspective from God, and I think God will give that to you. So
Yeah.
Bob said all the scenarios have already been lived out, and there's lots of wisdom from people who have walked this road.
Yeah. Yeah. And going through this with that grace and that forgiveness and is really important. I mean, my sister and I had that fight right then, very harshly, but we forgave each other very quickly. We had to, I mean, I felt like that I was going, whoa, wait, there's no need for this, I mean, it did, we didn't understand it at the time, but, she wasn't wrong and I wasn't right, like we were talking about not being wrong and not being right, but having that forgiveness for one another and that love and compassion for each other, going through this and comforting each other, through grieving, it's very, important, to support one another, regardless, I think, of anybody's, stance on that, and taking that time, because those are the people that are beside you. They're not the people that are your adversary. They are beside you. They're going through it just like you are. They're,
Right.
So you have to look at that. That you need them. You need them with you and to walk this out.
Right.
And I see it. Every family goes through this, and unfortunately, I know that there are many families that have been torn up over those things. And that's why I just always hope that, it's not about things, it's really about relationship, and even if you're differing in your relationship with God, and what even with that person and their relationship with God is, actually having him, seeking him to give you the peace through it and the words to say. Sometimes you're not supposed to say anything, right? Sometimes you just be quiet.
Yeah.
And you just love, and you love with each other, love on each other, you know. I think sometimes we make it difficult, but having those important things in place helps your family members. My dad did a thing. He knew that we went through what we went through, the whole thing, and which my sister and I don't agree with, but it's his decision. He gave his power of attorney to his attorney, so that we don't have to make those decisions. He said, I don't want you guys to have to make those decisions. I'm going to and of course we don't agree with that, but that's his wishes, that's fine. Of course he's still with us. So, we're like, Dad, we promise we're not going to make any bad decisions. We promise,
I'd like to see that attorney's bill, billable hours for bedside waiting for somebody to perish.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I'm like, why that?
Yeah.
So I mean, and we could have an issue over that if you think about it. Like we could be pretty mad at our dad about that, but we have to go in that with forgiveness. Like, okay, to us, it feels like you don't trust us. Maybe we're going to do the wrong decision, but at the same time, if that's what your wishes are, show grace.
$1,000 attorney bill for power of attorney, $20,000.
So we're just like, okay,
he's trying to avoid. Yeah, he's trying to avoid there being a.
He doesn't want to. Yeah.
So you and I were talking, and I think another danger for Christians, especially, is that especially dealing with non-Christians and even with each other, is that there's always this assumption that they know what God is doing, that we understand God. Now, we would say that the gospel would tell us, the Bible would tell us that we understand some things about God, but that there's more that we don't understand, and certainly what God's doing. And you and I were talking about a story that's always helped me in John, I think it's 11. I'm sure it's in other gospels as well, about Martha and Mary and Lazarus, how Jesus had, been requested by them to come because their brother Lazarus was sick. And these are arguably three of the closest friends of Jesus on the planet Earth, who he loved dearly, spent time with. These weren't people who had, some calling we knew of, who were fellow apostles that were being sent out to go, launch churches in, foreign lands. These were his dear friends. And they requested, I believe, several times for Jesus to come. And Jesus actually pulled away, allowed Lazarus to go through death, 4 days of mourning. He then shows up and Martha came out, and then Mary came out, and when he saw her and friends weeping, Jesus begins weeping, and then turns right around and raises Lazarus from the dead.
Right.
Now, you could pass over that story till you think like, start thinking through some of the questions that we were talking about out of that apply. Like, so God allowed those closest people to him to literally suffer death and the loss of death for his glory. He came in when he knew he was going to raise them from the dead,
right,
and said, and actually still empathize with the weeping at the human level, and didn't just dismiss it like, oh, I'm just going to raise them from the dead, quit worrying about it, not a big deal, this is for the glory of God. Instead, he didn't dismiss them or make light, but instead wept with those who were weeping, and then proceeded to raise him from the dead. Right. And you would think, and of course we know at the end that, Mary was I believe the first one to see Jesus, and certainly they never abandoned him, right, or his friends. But you would think, what's the possibilities that they would be a little bit ticked off about that they would say, right, hey, how come you didn't stick somebody else as an example for this?
Right.
Why did some horribly wicked person who hated you to, show as an example and save them in the process instead?
Right. And a lot of people, a lot of people don't understand that story. And the story, though, I know we didn't talk about this part of it, but what was the reasoning he did that? Well, he did that to prove that he could resurrect someone
Mhm.
and that he would resurrect someone, and he would allow people to go through the mourning process of it, but then raise them from the dead. And that had to be a miracle that had to be shown so that when it happened, when he died, right? So there's a correlation to it, and then as to why he did it, to show that it was his glory, it was his miracle.
Well, think of this question that we hear, like, why does God allow good people to suffer? Well, God allowed people that he loved dearly to suffer
Suffer.
greatly. God
Yeah.
allows people he loves dearly to suffer greatly, and his love isn't attached to what he will allow you to go through. He didn't love them any more or less, and he had great earthly affection for them, clearly, by all that we know. So, in the middle of it, it teaches you to say, I think, that yes, there are things we can know about God. There are some principles we can understand, but be very careful before you assume you know what God is doing. I'll give you one other example. I had a really close friend, and his mother, dear Christian woman, great mom, great grandmother, and she had a dream. And he's a guy like Joseph; he dreams all the time. And his mother passed away from um, Alzheimer's, but she had a dream that she had it 5 years before. She lived with it. It was brutal on their family. She was, one of the bad actor Alzheimer patients who was cussing and accusing kids and passed away. I don't know how you make sense of that. She knew it was going to happen ahead of time. She called it like in a dream. They all were waiting for it. It happened that way. And how do you make sense out of it? And I don't have the answers, and I'm sure maybe their family has more insight now. But you just have to be careful that you don't, judge God or charge God, or assume that you understand God's ways simply because you've got an Americanized view of life that tells you that if I do good things happen, and I should never suffer. And if God loves me, I would never suffer. You don't find that to be true.
Right.
Those things are not necessarily attached.
That goes back to, what we were talking about, Bob and I talking about, God's will with my sister last week. We were talking about God's will versus our will. God is a mystery. God has some things in a mystery here. When I was a pastor, I used to get asked a lot of hard questions, and I would always I would have to say the truth. I don't know. I don't know how God thinks. I think that the Bible shows us kind of his character, his ways, and some of the decisions he makes and why. And he kind of lays down, this is what I find good. This is what I don't find good, et cetera, et cetera. But there's still a little gray in the middle, right? There's still a little bit of mystery that we don't have the answers for. A human being, even Jesus, had to go through even worse than we had to go through sometimes. I mean, he's gone, he's been tempted. He had to go through a crucifixion, which was way worse than anything we could go through. And so it's kind of like, that's when there's a little phrase out there that says, but Jesus, because you don't know the answers. It's like, well, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm going to do, what Jesus came here to show us is to love one another, to forgive one another, to ask for forgiveness, to seek him, to seek his peace. And that's where it always, the culmination of it. I used to make it very much more complicated than that. I'll be honest. As when I was in theology, I made it way more complicated. I was trying to think over here and this, I was trying to think up here. And so that didn't work so well, because God doesn't work just up here. He works with all three: mind, body, spirit. He really does. So you can't equate everything from what you think and what you think he thinks. You absolutely have to go into that place of trusting, having faith, and forgiving, grace, and love. I've equated it just that the fruits of the spirit. That's it. I don't think we can make sense out of the whole world, unless we come from those places. We talk about worldview a lot. That's the worldview that we need to have. I used to never understand, and I'm just going to say hippies. So if you're a hippie, please don't be offended. But I never understood hippies and their whole peace and love, blah, blah, blah. I'm with them now. Peace and love, because they have it right. Like, that's it. Peace and love. That's it. I wish we all could come from that place. We try to complicate things and we try to put things on other people so much. And we try to put our willfulness nature. We try to put our, what we think is right, and et cetera, et cetera. How about we just stop and take it in and ask God. That's where I always fail. I don't know about you, but I fail when I forget to ask him about anything. When I keep him out of the equation, I mess it all up. I stumble, I fall. I need to bring him in the middle of the equation. And sometimes he doesn't give me an answer. Sometimes I'm just being real here. And sometimes I don't get an answer and I don't know why. But I don't keep, knocking on the door and pounding on the door going, God, why are you not telling me? He'll show me in his time, not my time.
I'm reminded of that. I think this is a good thing. I know we're probably ending there, but a good thing to bring in here is that Job, as we all know, was this righteous man who was God said the most righteous man on the face of the earth. And yet he allowed, Satan to, sift him and test him. He lost his children, his wealth, his reputation, his marriage, his friends. He was alone scraping boils. And he had, for 40 some odd chapters, his fists are raised against God until he sees God. He literally puts his hand over his mouth, and literally all the whys dissipate when he saw God. There was no why. There was no question left. There was no challenge left in him. And that's where I think we need to focus when we're in pain of all kinds, this and anything else, is that God's near the brokenhearted. Draw near to me and I will draw near to you. Be poor in spirit. Be in a house of mourning. David, the greatest king, said, I'm like a weaned, my soul's my heart's like a weaned child within me, and we need to let God be the father and us be the child in those times, and recognize that relationship is real and that we don't know, and that it's likely we may not even know in eternity, and we might, but that and a lot of it is that God is constantly drawing us to himself to comfort us, draw us near to him, build that relationship through things that you would say would almost seem completely adversarial to that, and that would be tearing down the relationship and trust. He uses those as bridges to build us up into, greater and greater people who walk after him. Yes.
Very good. Yes. And Heather said that she's went through many things and that she doesn't understand any of it, but I know her well, and she still has faith, and she still believes that God, and she's still going to follow him. So what does that tell you? That's a testament to that. And I don't know if you've read many near-death or people that have died and come back to life, or anything. That's the thing, is they don't ask any of those questions at that time. They don't ask any of those questions. You know why? Because they see the glory that God has, and and that peace that comes. They don't have those questions anymore. So, I have heard that over and over, that's kind of their whole thing, is we don't have any questions. So all the questions, I guess, are answered, because of the peace. The peace supersedes the questions. Mm-hmm. So Michael, I'm sorry that you're going through this, and definitely wish you well, and, sending you much love and many prayers to your family, during this time, because it can be, but just remembering, that peace, love, and forgiveness, peace in the midst of it, because we don't make the right decisions sometimes. Sometimes we don't know what the right decisions are, and that's why, who's wrong, who's right. And when we get rid of that and we come to that, what did you say? The common ground, come to the common ground, it sounds like, that, is that your quote?
Well, I'm borrowing that from other things I've read in this situation. We can.
Okay.
Yes.
Definitely. So we definitely thank you for talking about this, with it being so raw, that, and there's Heather. She trusts in him, and her faith, and that's what it comes down to, is just that faith that we have, and that peace that we show, and the love and the grace that we give one another, because we don't know, God's a mystery sometimes. We don't know all the answers, but
yeah.
Yes. So there's Heather. I'm still putting their comments up there, but I hope, please let us know. And again, yes, if you need anything from us too. So
absolutely.
It's a hard conversation. So, and Jason's on here. Hey, Jason. Yeah, there's no right or wrong decision.
Yeah.
Yep. That's it. And I think we've all went through this in some way or another, with our siblings, especially. And so,
yeah. You have to give people a wide berth, Jason. I agree. You got to give them a lot of space to work through things and come to different conclusions.
We just have to celebrate life and the love we share. And that's right. So tell me something about your mother. Tell me something about her, something special.
Well, I think my mother, I think one of the things I've admired about her the most is that she has a will of iron. She's not probably ever one time said she wasn't going to walk out of that hospital room, be healed, get better, when I'm able to. And, it was kind of an amazing thing to see every medical professional in the hospital write her off that today is going to be the day, it's not going to last. And I'm like suddenly going, I don't think she's going to go. My sister said, I don't think she's going to go quietly into the night. And sure enough, the will to live and the will to fight back, I've always admired about her, that she's, done that. So, yeah.
So she's still doing that. So,
yeah.
Oh, well, if you don't mind, what's her first name?
Connie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, many prayers to Connie.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, we are going to end this, and thank you all for joining in and talking about this subject matter. And if you have any insight or any comments, please put them in the comments after. And Michael, thank you for sharing, and thank you for being so authentic about it and everything. Because some people, I think that's why we don't know about it, is because we don't talk about this. We don't bring this to the surface, and I think it needs to be talked about a little bit more than what we do. So thank you. I appreciate you letting us use your story. So,
thank you.
All right. Thank you. Many prayers to you all. And I hope you all have a nice rest of your week. And I will see you guys on Monday morning. And Bob, if you're still out there, I hope that you get better as well, because I have missed you. I didn't know if you saw that I had a solo act with James Dean the other day, but that didn't fly very well. Nobody said anything to James Dean. It was kind of sad. But anyway, so So anyway, you guys take care and many blessings to you all.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.